Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. By way of introduction, I'm David Nye, the Major Airports Manager at the Australian Airports Association. For technical assistance today, please contact Redback Support on 1-800-733-416. If you'd like to listen to this webinar through your phone instead, please dial in the number and passcode that is listed in the chat box. Today, the AAA presents the webinar CASR Part 139 Post-Implementation Review, presented by Darren Angelo, Acting Manager Aerodrome Regulation, and Simon Adamson, the Project Manager Regulatory Implementation at CASR. In today's webinar, Darren and Simon will be providing an update on the post-implementation review of Part 139 of the Civil Aviation Safety Regulations, including proposed changes to MOS Part 139. The opportunity to ask questions will be provided, and to ask Darren and Simon a question, please use the chat box, which is located on the left-hand side of your screen, just to the right of the cogwheel. And when asking a question, if you can also just advise which airport or aerodrome you're from, that will help the guys with your inquiry. And after typing out your question, hit enter to submit. Questions will be answered by Darren and Simon throughout the webinar. Before we start, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank Darren and Simon for their participation today. And without further ado, I'll hand over to the guys to kick off the webinar. So over to you.
All right, thank you, David, and good morning, everyone from around Australia. So myself and Simon Adamson are here to basically give you a second webinar on the post-implementation review of Part 139. I wanted to thank the Australian Airports Association for providing the opportunity to present to you all today, and also I want to thank you all for your time in hearing our latest update on the project. So what we want to do is basically cover 5 key areas today. We're aware that some people might be joining this webinar for the first time or might not have a lot of information about the project. So what we'd like to do is just basically run you through quickly how we got to where we are today, and also talk about the regulatory context for Part 139 and how it works with the other parts of the regulatory system. What we'll then focus on is our consultation process, which is we ask, you said, we did. We're aware that a lot of people in the industry want to know what the next steps are, and fundamentally some of you out there might be asking yourselves a fundamental question, which is why should I transition to the new rules? So we hope to answer some of those questions in the webinar today. So with regard to the journey to date, we've had this project active for several years, but it all started basically because the industry advised that having challenges with the Part 139 rule set. And as a bit more history, we were lucky in one sense that Part 139 was one of the first regulations to transition from the former safety aviation regulations to the new civil aviation safety regulations. That transition means that this rule has been operating for about 15 years now, so it's good that industry have had the benefits over that time, but we're aware that there needs to be an update to ensure it continues to perform effectively, to ensure its outcome of safe aviation at aerodromes. So we started by looking at researching what other like-minded regulators were doing worldwide, looking to see what best practice was available. And as I indicated, there were several industry submissions at that time where we got feedback as to where industry were finding challenges and what some of their key indications were for change. So then what we did is we formed a project team, and that was representative of various segments of the industry. So we had aerodrome operators, we had aircraft operators, government representatives, other associative bodies, as well as a regulator. So we sat around initially and we agreed on a policy going forward. What we then did was we formulated an issues register with various challenges being faced by both CASR and industry with the regulation, as well as the manual standards Part 139. That then led to a line-by-line technical review of the existing regulation and the manual standards, or the MOS. Now, not to put a fine point on it, we actually went through every single clause and provision of both the regulation and the MOS, trying to understand its outcome, that is desirable, and also its regulatory intent. And this then led into what we call a lay drafting process, where we basically marked up a Word version of the regulation and MOS and then tabled it as a project team, and we worked together on various solutions and technical updates. This then led to the formal drafting by Office of Parliamentary Counsel for the regulation and internal to CASR, a revised draft of the Part 139 MOS. and that work was largely completed in July last year. So then what we did was we followed our consultation process by preparing a notice of proposed rulemaking. And this is where we indicate to industry what some of the changes could be, why those changes have been proposed, and some of the strategies for implementation post-making. And that was released to the public and industry for comment on the 21st of August 2017. We negotiated a longer than normal consultation process because there was a lot of information we understand had to be reviewed by industry. There was a 20-page regulation and about a 400-plus page manual of standards to review, as well as the NPRM overarching document, which went for 26 pages. We also, at that stage, had a fairly new consultation system up and running, a web-based one, so we allowed plenty of time for industry to review the material and to get back to us, and that closed on the 8th of December 2017. Now, Part 139 does not exist in isolation. Whilst it predominantly regulates aerodromes, and it's a subpart, which is Part 139H, deals with rescue firefighting, it also deals with radio communications at aerodromes and other elements into obstacle monitoring and airspace protection. It also flows very, very strongly into other CASR parts, predominantly Part 171, which deals with communications, navigations and surveillance, Part 172, which deals with air traffic control, Part 173, which deals with terminal instrument flight procedure design, and Part 175, which deals with aeronautical data. And that comes under the air traffic management system overall. Those who use radios on aerodromes have to be competent and licensed to use that. So there's a crossover into another CASR part called 64, which is relatively new. At aerodromes, they formulate something called a safety-sensitive aviation activity, and operation aerodromes are also quite critical for the total aviation system. So Part 99 deals with drug and alcohol management, so there's a crossover there. Now, to be transparent, CASR's focus at the moment is to transition the operational rules. Now, they still exist largely in the civil aviation regulations, and they too are following the journey that Part 139 did in 2003 to transition across to the civil aviation safety regulations. You may have seen the rules of the air, which is CASR Part 91, where consultation has closed, and there'll be further consultations for low and high capacity air transport and also aircraft operator certificates and other supporting legislation. Now, whilst the priority is to get those out, there is a crossover potentially to aerodromes because aircraft flying use aerodromes, and also aerodromes provide critical infrastructure for aircraft operators. Those two projects are working in tandem. So what we're trying to do in Part 39 is to ensure that we're prepared, ready for the operational rule implementation, and to ensure that the elements for aerodromes and updated technical standards are also fed into the operational project. Now, under the Civil Aviation Act, CASR's got a primary responsibility to provide safety advice. So we routinely contact and communicate with local, state and federal government agencies, as well as other key government stakeholders and industry participants. So in the process of providing advice for aerodromes, we need to be cognizant of that because what we put into the Part 139 regulations and standards affects the advice that we provide industry and government. So our consultation process follows a very, very simple formula, which is we ask, you have your say, and then we respond to your feedback and make changes. So in August, through the notice of proposed rulemaking, we asked for your comments on the overall policy, which contained 11 key change proposals. These include, but not limited to, a transition to a very simple certification structure for all aerodrome operators, and then the introduction of a scalable regulatory system based on how busy aerodrome operators were in terms of passengers, numbers and aircraft movements. We also then provided you with a draft regulation and a draft manual of standards so you could review the detailed technical changes in accordance with the overarching policy. Now, in response, you provided us with some fantastic comprehensive feedback. We had 109 responses to our NPRM survey, 76 from individuals and 33 from organisations. What was very, very encouraging is we also had 39 separate file uploads, which contained, in some cases, pages and pages of technical feedback against manual standards, comments against the regulatory policy, and other suggestions for change. What we can announce today is that all 11 proposals in the NPRM have broad industry support across the industry, which is great that we had your response through your feedback. What we were also encouraged with was we had 1,500 plus detailed technical comments, which also included suggestions for change. And most of those were against manual standards, but the volume of feedback is important that we have a good confidence that industry has had their say, and we've also got good suggestions we know industry can accept going forward. So in terms of demographics about who we heard from, so overarchingly we had aerodrome operators respond from the remote, the mining, rural, regional, major and international aerodrome operators. In the other box were other industry participants, so they could be pilots, members of the general public that fly aircraft into and out of your aerodromes, aircraft operators, government stakeholders and other key industry personnel. From that feedback, what we then did is charted the volume of feedback against every part of both the regulation and the parts of the manual of standards. And this provides some interesting feedback in our initial analysis. So the existing manual standards in Chapter 6 deals predominantly with physical characteristics. And this is related to Part 6 of the revised manual standards draft that you saw. So we had a lot of feedback on physical characteristics. Whilst we didn't have the same volume of feedback for individual parts, if you look at it collectively, we had significant feedback on what we call the operational and also the administrative elements of the new MOS. And probably not surprisingly to all of you, we had a lot of feedback on visual aids. Part 8, which deals with signs, markers and markings, relates to the current Chapter 8 of the current MOS, and that would be Part 8 of the new MOS draft. And Part 9 of the new MOS draft deals with lighting systems. So we had a lot of feedback on those elements of the drafting. Now it's very, very challenging for us in the limited time of the webinar to go through all the technical feedback we've received, but we intend to release, as indicated, those comments from industry which have been pre-approved for public release. But I will just go through some of the high-level feedback now. So we initially, not so much from aerodrome operators, but users of aerodromes had requests for procedures, what we call unregulated aerodromes. Now, it's very important to stress that when aircraft are operating under flight conditions, when they can't see and avoid obstacles, it's very important for those corridors of airspace to be kept clear of all potential hazards. And that's why CASR's current policy position is that only aerodromes which are regulated and have those obstacle monitoring systems which are subject to monitoring in place can support 2-minute flight procedures. Now, whilst that's out of scope of this project, this is valuable feedback and we'll endeavour to feed that into future policy work with CASR, and in time we might revisit that position. So it was good that we heard from industry on that basis. What a lot of aerodrome operators, however, spoke to us about through their feedback was the cricket criteria for the new regulatory system that we're proposing. At the moment, in the current regulations, aerodromes with runways available for aircraft above 30 passenger seats must be certified. We're looking to revise that trigger criteria to just aerodromes for 2-minute flight procedures, or those who opt in. So we provided some feedback on those proposed changes. We had some feedback from aerodrome operators as to how they could better control or influence the publication of those procedures at their aerodromes. This is great feedback, and we've got a separate review underway for Part 173, which is the 2-minute flight procedures. And feedback from this project will flow into the future review and updates of those regulations and standards in time. We also had some other feedback about what the role of monitoring by the aerodrome operator for the surfaces visible from the aerodrome boundary during the serviceability checks, and also the systems which are tested and evaluated through technical inspections. So great feedback, and thank you for bringing those submissions forward. From the previous slide, I saw there's a lot of feedback about the manual standards in terms of technical comments, but overarchingly we had some feedback stating industry want to better understand what constitutes outcome-based standards. What is CASR's expectation? How does CASR assess outcome-based standards? And how can industry put their proposals forward? What we're seeking to do is to provide better training and education through guidance material to answer those questions. What was encouraging is there was a very strong desire from industry and their feedback for enhanced ICAO alignment through Annex 14, Volume 1. This view is shared by CASR because we have obligations to ICAO to have alignment wherever possible, so it's encouraging those industry support those proposals in the NPRM. There was some feedback we received about trying to simplify the legal and technical language used in the manual standards and the regulation where possible. Whilst there's some limitations to how much we can do that, given that these are legislative documents and are written by very, very qualified and technical legislative drafters against very, very strict policy settings, what we can try to do outside of that is provide you with better guidance and training and education to explain what those requirements are based on the legislation, the regulation and the MOS. For aerodrome manuals, we had a request for simple templates which was requested, and also a desire to have the manual scalable in accordance with the aerodrome's complexity overall. Now with the accountable manager, which we seek to introduce to align aerodromes with all other parts of the legislative system, so we have accountable managers for those who fly aircraft, those who run airlines and aircraft operators, those who deal with maintenance. We're seeking to introduce that provision into aerodromes. However, there was questions raised about what the required skills, knowledge and qualifications would be for that position and any legal implications. Again, we intend to provide enhanced guidance and education and training through the project to answer those questions. We had a lot of feedback on Part 6 of the MOS, predominantly around runway surface conditions, which is runway texture requirements and friction testing, and also the allowable slopes for runways and pavement shoulders. For visual aids, we had some feedback on markings, mainly around aprons, where Annex 14 normally is less prescriptive. There's a lot of industry best practice and proposal put forward through Airports Council International, and also practices used around a lot of aerodromes today. So a lot of feedback on that. With lighting, we had some feedback on commissioning procedures, which we're seeking to change, apron floodlighting, which is better aligned with Annex 14 Volume 2, and also clarifying the technical requirements for runway, taxiway and approach lighting systems. For operational elements, we had questions and comments on monitoring of airspace for the obstacle limitation surface, and also the surfaces required to support simultaneous flight procedures, which are clearly specified in the ICAO PANSOPS document. We're seeking, because of the changes in communications, navigation, surveillance systems, and aircraft increasingly navigating using what we call GNSS or GPS and augmented systems. These need different protection requirements, which are currently in the manual standards as it stands today, as well as the meteorological services that support aircraft operations. So with those changes, there was a lot of feedback on how best to implement them at aerodromes and how to protect those infrastructure if they are within your aerodrome boundary. Again, we'll refine the technical standards as well as provide enhanced guidance. We're seeking to align emergency planning with risk at aerodromes and use of passengers and aircraft movements, and also adopt some of the ICAO alternative proposals for exercising. And also we're seeking to roll out and align safety management systems with aerodrome complexity, look at alternatives for risk management plans, and also enhance the regulation of safety management systems, which will enhance the safety and assure safety at your aerodromes. So at this point of the presentation, I'll hand over to my project manager, Simon Adamson, who will step you through some of the next key elements of the project and key steps going forward. So over to you, Simon.
Well, thank you, Darren. So just by way of background, my role at CASR is somewhat different to Darren. So Darren is and remains a preeminent expert on aerodromes here at CASR, and my role is as a project manager to ensure that CASR is ready for transition and implementation of the revised regulations, but also to ensure that industry is ready for the changes that are coming as well. And so I'd like to take you through a little more about what we've been doing recently and what's coming up in the next few months. So what we've been doing since consultation closed in December last year is reviewing the feedback, as Darren mentioned, some 1,500 individual technical elements, and I want to reinforce that we at CASR are grateful for receiving that feedback. We're interested in making the best regs that we possibly can, and your feedback is a vital element of that, so thank you for that. We're conducting that analysis. That is now complete. It's been quite a long process, but in order to ensure quality, we've undertaken a few key steps, such as error checking. We've ensure that we've redacted the responses to take away any information that you might not want public, such as phone numbers. And we've done a moderation process on that feedback as well. So when the feedback is released into the consultation hub, we're ensuring it's as high quality as it possibly can be. We formed an independent internal review team. So in addition to Darren's very valuable input, we've sought the advice of another aerodromes inspector, Kirsten, in Perth. We've also included myself and our comms officer, Hannah, in that review team. This will help ensure that the feedback is reviewed independently and again, ensuring a high quality product at the end. We've nearly completed our detailed technical review of the 1,500 submissions line by line there, and as I mentioned, there'll be a summary consultation released this month to highlight exactly what we found. Much of that is detailed in Darren's comments above. So the next step after that is to conduct some technical workshops. So as Darren's mentioned, there are some specific areas where we would like some additional assistance to produce a high quality regulatory change there. So pavements, lighting and operations. And we're looking to conduct those workshops in July and August 2018. These will be organised by CASR and we'll invite people as required to those. Once we've conducted those workshops and received that feedback, we'll be liaising with the Aviation Safety Advisory Panel. The Aviation Safety Advisory Panel, or ASAP, was established last year to provide independent advice to CASR on matters of regulatory change and also to ensure that the changes that are being made will meet industry's needs and will be able to be implemented by industry as well. So what will happen there is that there will be a technical working group established via ASAP. For information, the constituents of that technical working group are likely to be largely the same as the previous working group. However, if you weren't involved in that working group and would like to be involved, then by all means submit an EOI via the CASR website there, and we'll be happy to consider that. The role of that technical working group is not to make a decision in isolation, it's to make recommendations to ASAP, which is, as I mentioned, a body of industry and other representatives, about whether the final recommendation, the final regulation will be workable by industry. This is to provide some oversight and some assurance that the regulations that are being produced by CASR are in line with the needs of industry as well as in line with the needs of safety. So once we've gone through the ASAP panel there, we'll go on to finalising the draft reg and the draft mod, and so that will happen inside CASR. However, we'll be liaising closely with the Office of Parliamentary Counsel to complete the drafting of the regulation, and then at the Department of Industry to make the regulation. So as I mentioned, there'll be feedback and results published on the consultation hub. This will happen in the next few weeks, this month. One of the next steps after that is to create new guidance material. So by way of volume there, we're expecting some 20 to 30 pieces of individual advisory circulars to be either updated or produced. And this will happen in the year leading up to the commencement of the regulation. One of the key steps between the time that we make the regulation and the time it commences is ensuring that everybody's ready and that there's sufficient information available and that the right artefacts are in place. And I'll go into some more detail later in the presentation about exactly what will be available to industry during the transition process. So some of the key things that we'll be producing in terms of supporting information will be information about what rules apply to your particular aerodrome. So as Darren mentioned, there is a scalable certification approach being taken here. So depending on the size of your operation, certain things may or may not apply. And more of that information would be provided closer to the transition time. And more information about exactly what you need to consider as well. One of the key things that we'll be producing is a template manual. So the key artefact in terms of deliverables here is a manual. there'll be two ways that we're supporting that process. In the past, CASR has produced a PDF or a Word version which has gone on the CASR website, and that can be used as a template, so that'll be happening again. In addition to that, we have an automated authoring tool where individual parts and sections can be loaded into the tool for review and approval, and we'll be making that available through this project as well. I think the key thing to remember is that the CASR is here to provide assistance throughout. There'll be a range of different stakeholders with different needs, and CASR is committed to providing assistance to all of them. And I'll get Darren to give you a few comments on the sorts of things that you can start doing now.
Okay, thank you, Simon. So, in terms of what's coming, we'll have to make the regulation first, and there'll be a period of preparation where both CASR and industry need to prepare for the change. So during this preparation phase, before the rules come into play, you might want to meet or have a discussion with your assigned aerodrome inspector. So we're going to give them training, we're going to give them the understanding of the way the regulations intended to function, and we'll basically be arming them to have these discussions with you so you can understand how the potential change is going to work for your aerodrome, because the aerodrome inspectors by far have the best knowledge about your technical requirements, how your aerodromes otherwise function, and the personnel that are involved within them. So they're a key stakeholder and a key support for this rule project change going forward. So we haven't talked a lot about the guidance material. However, there's potentially 25 to 30 or even more advisory circulars that we'll be updating and releasing to industry. And we tend to have those all complete just before the rules commence, but obviously we'll try to get those done as much in front as possible. So with that guidance material provided, we're hoping that you'll understand the intent and the outcome that we're desiring as a regulator, and how best you can support your own transition to the new regulatory system. What we're also trying to do is make this process as smooth and as streamlined as possible. So what we're trying to do is better understand the transition that we have to address as a regulator, and also industry's desires in this regard. So we want to basically provide a survey to industry in the future to understand two fundamental questions. Firstly, if you intend to transition to the new regulatory system, and when you would like to transition. Once we understand that, we can better formulate a transition strategy to ensure that the appropriate support to industry is available and the CASR systems are ready for that process as well. So at the moment we're calling it an application process, but we're going to try to move away from that as a strict sort of form-based process. We want to preserve as much as possible what is already in place today. Certified aerodromes today have a manual, and for even registered already in place today. Certified aerodromes today have a manual, and for even registered aerodromes, we have a good understanding about their technical requirements and also how the infrastructure and operations are being done today. What we want to do is focus on where these gaps may otherwise be with the new regulatory system, and then focus on that in the transition strategy. So we're trying to make this simple for both existing certified and registered aerodromes, and potentially new applications may well be considered for new entrants who want to take advantage of the new legislative system going forward. So we need to work out a process that support both entities. And as Simon said before, one of the biggest and probably most significant elements of that transition will be the manual. So for existing aerodrome manuals for certified aerodromes, we're going to largely preserve those, but merge them into the new system. Or for those who have to provide a new manual, giving them both options, as Simon explained before, which is providing the Word document template or a smart PDF or some alternative, or using the manual authoring tool. So we'll provide further details of that once that's more mature, but we're going to provide industry with the flexible approach to make that transition. So I'd like to hand over to Simon to talk about some deliverables and dates.
Thank you, Darren. So our next key date is what we describe as the make date. That's the date that the regulation will come into law. We have that scheduled for the end of 2018. That's a delay on what's been previously advertised. One of the contributing factors was the depth and detail of the technical feedback. And again, I'm very appreciative for receiving that feedback. We'd rather take the time to get that right and ensure that as much we can make the best quality reg that we possibly can by incorporating as much of that feedback as we can. So once we've made the reg, commencement date will be not less than 12 months from that make date. Once the make date is locked in there, the commencement date is also locked in, and our transition strategy and all of the supporting material and advisory circulars are tied to that. Transition period will take 3 years, and as Darren mentioned, we'll be seeking a statement of intent from industry to understand exactly when each aerodrome intends to transition, and we'll be using that to formulate our transition plan. And again, supporting you every step along the way. There are a lot of benefits to transition, and Darren will take you through those now.
Thank you. So one of the fundamental questions that people might be asking is why should I transition, and what otherwise would be the benefits of going from the current system to the new? So the fundamental one is because we're looking at the certification trigger to be linked to turbulence front flight procedures, sustaining access to those procedures. So those not familiar with what turbulence front flight procedures are about, they allow aircraft to operate under what we call instrument meteorological conditions. They provide, in some cases, safety enhancements to provide procedures for aircraft operating at instrument flight rules to do proper and very safe approaches to the aerodrome and minimising exposure to hazards such as terrain and obstacles. Having those procedures at your aerodromes enhances accessibility, enhances safety, and they are a very, very key benefit to those aerodromes that have them, or for those who seek to put them into place down the track. So being in the regulatory system means you can preserve access to those procedures, or your aerodrome is ready for those who you might want to have designed for your aerodrome. Another benefit is the scalable certification model. So at the moment we've got a one-size-fits-all for all certified aerodromes. What we seek to change is having certification requirements scalable based on how busy the aerodromes are, based on how many passengers or aircraft movements they support. There's numerous updates happening to the ICAO standards, mainly in the physical characteristics areas. So we're seeking to bring those into the new manual standards. Now, whilst aerodromes are potentially protected by grandfathering arrangements, many aerodromes may well seek to take advantage of the new standards because they may otherwise provide regulatory relief, and they also provide safety enhancements based on ICAO best practice, which is based on worldwide research and input from numerous member states. And for many aerodromes that aren't as busy in terms of how many passengers or how many aircraft movements they facilitate, there could be, in some cases, regulatory relief for those aerodromes. Mind you, some aerodromes may well seek to keep the existing systems in place to provide safety enhancements, but we're hoping this new model going forward provides some degree of flexibility and also ensures that the aerodromes get busier, the regulatory requirements scale up in accordance with safety assurance. As I spoke about earlier in the webinar, we've got the new operational rules coming, and we're seeking through Part 139 to ensure aerodromes are prepared for that as well. And during the transition strategy, as Simon indicated, we're going to be throwing significant resources to support industry during that period. Once the aerodromes have advised transitions, those resources may well be directed to other projects, so there is an advantage in transitioning during the transition period to ensure you have access to that support. In terms of not transitioning, aerodromes that do have instrument flight procedures may well have to have those withdrawn because, as I said earlier, it's important that turbulence front flight procedures are supported at aerodromes that have the systems for obstacle monitoring and protection in place. What we're trying to do to ensure that aerodromes which are subject to legacy standards, we're showing that they have facilities towards the make date of the rules, and some of those standards are going back decades. They'll be able to take advantage of those until they otherwise upgrade or replace. For new entrants, however, the expectation is they'll follow the new standards. And some people in industry have given us some positive feedback that they value CASR's ongoing safety oversight because it provides another level of safety assurance and also in some cases reduces insurance liabilities and premiums. And some operators seek to operate to aerodromes that have a certification status because it provides them that assurance of a safe operation. So as Simon's indicated, and we just want to close the webinar on this point, we will support you during transition, and there's a lot of resources that Simon's going to manage through the project to ensure that aerodromes that are transitioning will be given education, guidance, information from their assigned inspector, and appropriate tools and templates and systems to transition to the new rule set. And this doesn't just apply to aerodrome operators. we are aware that there's some valuable work being undertaken by the numerous technical consultants and specialists out there in industry that numerous aerodromes rely upon to give them support and advice. And we seek to provide dedicated training and engagement to that level to ensure that they understand the new legislative system, the regulations and the manual standards, and can support the aerodrome operators they contracted to work to. Government stakeholders are also important, and other aircraft operators also want to understand the rules. We're providing training to those, and other key stakeholders as well have been captured and will be supported during transition. So this is very much a team approach. We want to look at this as part of aerodrome being a overall part of the civil aviation system. But at that point of the webinar, I just want to say thank you again for your time. We will close the presentation now. However, we stand ready to answer any questions that you have about the transition. We've got our communications officer here to also capture your feedback. We're also seeking to update our website, our frequently asked questions, and our guidance material going forward. So thank you, and we await your questions.
Great. Thanks very much, Darren and Simon. And we've got a lot of people signed into this presentation, so this is a great opportunity to direct any questions to Darren and Simon. So please flip in any questions, and the guys are online so they can actually answer them for you now. And in response to the question regarding the presentation, yes, the AAA will be making the webinar and the presentation available to those that registered, so that will be available in due course. So there's one question that's just come through.
Okay, thank you for that question from Gary. So at the moment we've got roughly 26 advisory circulars. So I might just go back to the question for those who can't see it. Gary Wickham asked, can you please clarify how many new advisory circulars you plan to release as part of the process, and when will details of this be made available? So we've got 26 there about advisory circulars. We're anticipating that we'll have to write more. Part of the scalability of that was dependent on the feedback. So where we know we've got a lot of industry questions and comments, we basically have a strong confidence that's an area that industry are interested in finding out more. And we've got the option to do that through the advisory circulars or through the training plan that we're also developing in parallel, also general guidance available on our website, through aviation safety advice, through the aerodrome inspectors and other industry engagement mechanisms. So I imagine it's probably going to be at least 30, if not more, advisory circulars. But what you can't see on the screen, but we've got a dedicated learning development team working behind the scenes. I believe one of them has actually signed on to the webinar, and they're doing a training and engagement strategy which will have, at this stage, we believe, online learning modules, potentially face-to-face workshops, potentially more webinars and other ways that we can deliver that best information to you out there in industry. What we'd like to understand from you is, given that we're all geographically dispersed around the country, is how best you would like to receive that information and what you would like to find out as well. And that's why we'll also be doing more questionnaires, including the intention questionnaire, so we can better capture and understand that. Going down the list, there was another question, so looking at doing works on an aerodrome. So can we plan them in line with ICAO and new MOL standards? So that's another great question. Be very, very clear, these rules are only proposed at this stage, so the only legislative rules that apply at the moment are the regulations and the manual standards. Now, what we're going to be doing is when we're looking to transition, we'll be starting to turn off the existing rules, and we'll do that through a new legislation called CASR Part 202. And as aerodromes transition, they will then be switched on to the new Part 139 regulation and standards. So if you cannot use the new rules at this stage and you would like to, the only option you've got is to use the Part 11 process under CASR Part 11, seek an exemption or some overarching approval to take advantage of those new rules or proposed rules until such time as they're made. But there is a risk in doing so because if there's any further changes to the manual, the standards and the regulation that's currently drafted, we want to ensure that there is a compliance state at the other side of that. So what I'd suggest you do is talk to your assigned inspector, put your proposals forward through an application supported by a safety case. There's a Part 11 process that has the mechanics of how that's done, and if it's successful, CASR will give you a separate instrument of exemption, which may otherwise cancel out once the new rules are made. So thank you for that question. I believe it's from Jared. There's another question here from David, which is what is the progress of implementing regulations for helicopters? So that's a parallel project that we're running. So that will be flowing on after this one. So this is a priority for industry at the moment and for CASR. But there's been a lot of advanced work being done on that project as well. We actually have a drafted plan for the new manual standards for rotary operations. Some of those elements have already been made visible through the revised Part 139 MOS. So you'll see enhanced marking for helicopter operations. But that project is the next project after this one, so we've got a lead time about 12 to 18 months after. So when that's a bit more understood and mature, what I intend to do with the project team is to provide a separate series of communications and potentially another webinar on Part 139R for rotary in due course. But thank you for the question. Scanning down, Peter has asked for increased detail of aerodrome work, particularly wingtip clearances from work limits markers. That's a very, very good suggestion. There is some information currently available in the ICAO manual suite, in the design manuals, which basically breaks down how the wingtip separations actually work and how they flow into the standards, which are against the definitive codes. So we look to take that detail in the manuals and put it into the enhanced guidance. What you might want to also take note of is that ICAO is making significant changes to Annex 14, including taxiway separation distances, taxiway and runway strips, holding point positions, and other elements of the physical characteristics. What they're doing when they change Annex 14 is they're also changing enhanced guidance, so we can actually take that guidance and then publish it in our own document suite as well. So thank you for the question. And I believe there's another one from the same individual about the legacy status and impact on aerodromes where compliance isn't practicable. And that's a question that was raised at 11:37. So what we're seeking to do is have a grandfathering arrangement which is based on facilities which are in existence prior to when the rules commence, as I understand them. So an existing facility which may have been built to infrastructure standards going back decades will be preserved until such time as that facility is upgraded in capability or replaced. One key change with this is that with the enhanced manuals, individual facilities will be linked to nominated codes, and those codes and capabilities will be basically where aerodrome operators will communicate their intent to change the operation and otherwise trigger an upgrade or replacement of that facility. So we'll provide some guidance around this to make it more better understood, but the new system is intending to be more transparent between CASR and the aerodrome operator. So the aerodrome operator makes the business decisions for their aerodrome. They will clearly communicate that through their manual. CASR understands what standards otherwise apply, and for existing facilities, they will otherwise be preserved by grandfathering arrangements until such time as they're upgraded or replaced. All right, so we've got another question from Peter, so thank you very much for your interest. He's asking, are sufficient resources for aerodrome inspectors provided to ensure they provide timely responses for requests and information on approvals and non-standard markings and aerodrome entry plannings? So what we need to do is enhance industry's understanding of how Part 11 works, because that deals with approvals, exemptions and other elements that are driven by that rule set. So that's a separate element of guidance. What we're looking to do, there's a document from ICAO called PAN's Aerodromes. It has some really good information in it. It's only been recently published. That will form part of our guidance materials. As I said, we'll be providing education for our own internal staff and also for industry on what these changes mean. And that will include the aerodrome inspectors who do a fantastic job out there. And what we want to make sure is that everyone understands what the intent behind the regulations and standards are, what the desired outcome, and what tools an industry can apply and CASR can support to ensure that outcome. Now, we are understanding that there are workload issues on industry and also on our inspectorate to do this transition. We're all very busy at the moment. However, one of the advantages about doing this through a project is there are dedicated project resources going to be brought to bear and have already been for the transition, as well as improving current business as usual processes and procedures. So we're very much a team approach, and we're encouraged by the support we've had from industry to date, and we seek to continue that into the project going forward. Okay, Peter, with next question about legacy responses. You're more than happy for you to contact me directly, and I'd be more than happy to answer your question. So thank you for that. Okay, we've come to the end of the webinar. David, did you want to provide some comments, or do you want to take a couple more questions if people are happy to hang on the line a bit longer?
Yeah, just if there's any other questions, get them through now, as we'll sort of start the wrapping up. And as you said, if there's anything specifically that people want to address or inquire, then obviously you've made yourself available offline for that, which again is very much appreciated. So any other questions, keep them coming through. But again, just thanking Darren and Simon for their informative presentation, and also thanks to everybody. We had a big audience today, which is fantastic. And so thanks for all the participation in the session. What we would ask you to do now is just to take a moment to complete a short survey that you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen. Please ensure you hit the orange submit button once you've completed all of the questions. As I mentioned earlier, and again, I think just in response to one of the questions that came through earlier, this webinar will be made available to members via the Airport Professional webinar page in the coming week, and it will also be emailed to everyone directly once available. We do encourage you to provide feedback on any other topics that you would like to see covered by emailing us at the AAA. Email address is events@airports.asn.au. For further details of our next AAA webinar, that'll be released in the next edition of the Airport Alert. So a link will be available to register. That'll be distributed by Redback shortly after. Doesn't seem to be any other questions. So if you'd like any further additional information on any of the webinars or any of the topics that we've discussed, please email us at the AAA events team. Again, that email address is events@airports.asn.au. So again, any closing comments, Darren and Simon?
Yeah, just in closing, I just want to, on behalf of the team here, just want to thank you, specifically the AAA, for the input you provided, the engagement opportunities you provided to CASR to reach out to your membership, and the overarching support we've got both from the AAA and from individual member airports, and also from industry on the whole. I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time and engaging with our webinar today. Please let us know if there's anything you don't quite understand, or what we can clarify, or what support you would like to see over the coming months. And then finally, thank you for your patience. These things do take time, and they do take time to get right. So far, we're confident. We've got fantastic feedback from industry. We've got a dedicated former project working group, which will likely flow on to the technical working group. But we've also had overwhelming support from other key experts in industry, and just wanted to overarching say thank you on behalf of the project for your input today. We couldn't do it without you. Simon, do you have any other comments?
Again, just my thanks for your participation today. This information being shared with industry helps us to deliver the best possible product for you. And again, just to reinforce, CASR is here to support you through the transition process.
So thank you, everyone.
So again, on that note, thanks again to Darren and Simon, and again for everybody in participating. We'll close off there, and everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much indeed.